Hello, everyone, and Shabbat Shalom. This week's Parsha is Pinchas. Pinchas is one of my favorite Parshiot in all the Torah. There's just like so much going on. It's very exciting. And yeah, it's just a great Parsha. What's interesting about this particular Parsha, though, is that we start the Parsha sort of in the middle of the story. We got the first bit last week in the Maftir of last week's Torah reading. And the gist is that following the events of Parshat Balak, the Israelites profaned themselves by going about and whoring with Moabite women and worshiping the gods of Baal Peor, right? These are big no-nos. We don't do those things. And so this incident, we call it the apostasy of Baal Peor, and God became incensed at this behavior and ordered Moses to execute the ringleaders of this, bad behavior. And while all of this is going on, people are sort of crying and weeping at the entrance to the Mishkan. And one Israelite guy named Zimri brings a Moabite woman right in front of Moses and all the people, and essentially begins to do inappropriate things with her in violation of God's command. And so Pinchas, who is Aaron's grandson, he grabs a spear and he goes to where they are in the chamber and he impales them with the spear, both at the same time. And then, all of the plague that was sort of happening at the same time, it went away, right? After Pinchas stabbed them, everything seemed to be better, right? The plague was abated, and everybody else who was just sort of standing around was like, there, everything is done. Okay. So this is sort of where we begin the Parsha. Right after that event, right, God tells Moses that Pinchas, he turned back my wrath, God says, right? Saying that explicitly, because of Pinchas's actions, God decided not to wipe out all of the Israelite people, as God is wont to do when we sin, right? God usually thinks his first, course of thought is to destroy everybody, but usually after some talking, God comes to a different resolution. And here, because of Pinchas, God decides not to do that. In fact, God actually rewards Pinchas with what we call the Brit Shalom, this covenant of peace. And I want to just think about that for a minute, right? So I know that sometimes people have a hard time with a God who can condone such violent behavior. And I think it's important to remember that this is an incident that happened a very long time ago, but also it's, to remind us that God's commands aren't just for show, right? They're not just for show. Pinchas's actions may have been extreme, but if we look at the text, nobody else was doing anything. Everybody else was just standing there. Nobody else did anything. Everybody else was being passive. They just stood there and watched. And here's where I think some of us tend to get a little stuck, right? We live our lives, today, and our lives are hectic. Our lives are crazy, and we're trying to do so many things, and there just isn't enough time. And so we end up prioritizing things. And I think sometimes we get our priorities a little bit mixed up. And so I think one of the lessons that we can learn from this week's Parsha is that faith cannot be passive, right? It's possible that sometimes maybe we wake up and we decide for whatever reason that maybe we're not going to go to services today, right? Somebody else will be there to help that person say Kaddish, to make the minyan, so I don't have to go. Or, I'll watch services online, even though, maybe we'll only be paying half attention, doing something else while the sounds of our sacred liturgy get drowned out by other things. Maybe it's a soccer game, maybe it's the golf game that's keeping us, whatever it is, we've let an opportunity to participate in sacred community pass us by. But faith cannot be passive, right? Our tradition demands certain things of us, and one of those things is that we cannot be bystanders, right? We're not allowed to do that. We have a sacred obligation to do our very best to come and be counted in a minyan, right? And that's an incredible thing, because there are some places in the world where a lot of people don't count, right? We all count. We count in a minyan, right? So we have an obligation to become and be counted, to be present. When someone is struggling, right? We don't get to stand there and just ignore it, right? It's a mitzvah to extend to that person acts of chesed, acts of loving kindness, right? When someone is hurting, we have a sacred obligation to be there for them, to be with them. The end of the Parsha talks about the sacrifices that are offered during holidays, and the Maftirei Hashana all come from Parshat Pinchas. But the also is discussed is the Tamid offering, and that was the offering that was brought twice daily to the temple, right? The tradition asks us to be active Jews every day, right? That Tamid offering is brought in the morning and in the afternoon, every single day. And so the last thought I'll leave us with today is that there's an interesting scriptural oddity in this week's Parsha. It's called the Vav K'ti'ah, the letter Vav in the word Shalom and Brit Shalom is actually cut in half, right? It's a split or a broken Vav. And some commentators suggest that this is because the Brit Shalom that Pinchas was given was sort of this broken piece, right? It wasn't a full piece, it was a broken piece because of the violent actions. And so we must be able to do one better than Pinchas, right? In order to receive a full covenant of peace and not a broken one. So let's do our very best to be the active Jews that we know we can be and show up not only to services, but also to show up for one another. So I hope that's some things good to think about. And I want to wish everybody Shabbat Shalom.